They said the Queen of Aldermere never raised her voice, not once in 40 years of rule. So when the physicians emerged from her chamber that gray morning and would not meet anyone's eyes, the whole palace understood something had shifted that no herald would need to announce. The old queen was dying. And before the week was out, a single line written in her own failing hand would fracture a court that had believed itself unbreakable, and place a boy of 19 at the center of a storm no one had prepared him to survive. His name was Aelian. He was the younger of 2 brothers, and he had spent his entire life learning to want nothing. Queen Serena of the House of Valar had ruled the mountain kingdom of Aldermere since she was 23, when a fever took her father and left her the crown before she had finished mourning him. She had married for the realm and not for love, and when her husband died in a hunting accident 11 years later, she did not remarry. She raised her 2 sons alone, in the way that queens do, which is to say, mostly through other people. The elder son was Cashen. Everyone agreed he would be a fine king one day. He was tall and certain and easy to admire, and from the time he could walk he had been treated as the future of the realm. The lords bowed a little lower to him. The tutors gave him the better hours. When the brothers played in the long gallery as children, it was always Cashen who was handed the wooden crown, and Aelian who was handed the wooden sword and told to guard him. Aelian never minded, or he told himself he never minded, which after enough years amounts to nearly the same thing. He was quieter than his brother, quicker to notice when a servant was limping or a horse was favoring a leg. He learned the names of the kitchen staff and the gate guards and the woman who mended the tapestries. He was, the court said fondly and dismissively, a gentle sort of prince. The kind you were glad existed and never expected to matter. So it surprised no one that when the queen fell ill, it was Cashen who stood at the front of every gathering, receiving the concern of the lords as though it were already his by right. And it surprised no one that Aelian spent those weeks where he always was, unnoticed, at the edges, this time at the edge of his mother's sickbed, because someone had to sit with her through the long nights and Cashen had meetings. That was how it happened that Aelian was the only one in the room when the queen woke, near the end, and asked for a pen. She had not spoken clearly in 3 days. The physicians had begun to speak of her in the past tense even while she breathed. But that night in the thin hour before dawn, her eyes opened and found her younger son slumped in the chair beside her, and there was something in them that had not been there in weeks. A sharpness, a decision. Aelian, her voice was a dry whisper, "Wake up." He was awake instantly, leaning forward, reaching for the water. She waved it away with 2 fingers. "Listen to me, my time is very short and I have wasted a great deal of it." She drew a breath that seemed to cost her something. "There is a paper in the writing desk, the locked drawer. Bring it and bring me a pen and do not call the physicians. Do you understand me? Not yet." He should have argued. Later he would wonder why he didn't. But there was a command in her that he had obeyed his whole life without ever being asked. And so he rose and found the key beneath the loose stone in the hearth where she pointed, and he opened the drawer. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper, already covered in his mother's handwriting from years of a firmer time. It was her testament, the formal declaration of succession, sealed and witnessed, naming Cashen as the heir to the throne of Aldermere. Aelian had known it existed. Everyone knew it existed. It was the most settled fact in the kingdom. He brought it to her along with a pen and a small pot of ink, and he held the board steady on her knees while she read her own words with a strange, tired expression. "Do you know," she said, "what it is to be certain of a thing your whole life and to learn at the very end that you were wrong about it?" "Mother—" "Be quiet, Aelian. I am about to do something, and I want you to remember that I did it in my right mind." She dipped the pen. Her hand shook badly, and she waited until it steadied. "Your brother is going to make a great deal of noise about this. I need one honest witness who was here, and God help me, you are the only honest thing in this palace." And then, beneath the sealed declaration naming Cashen, in a hand that wavered but did not stop, Queen Serena wrote a second line. Aelian read it as she wrote it, and felt the floor of his life tilt. Let the crown pass to the son who was never taught to want it. Let Aldermere be ruled by Aelian. She signed it. She pressed her ring into the wax the servant kept warm by the fire. Aelian's hands did that part because hers could not, and she watched to be sure he did it right. And then she set the pen down and closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she had gone. But she spoke once more. "I gave everything to your brother from the day he was born," she said, "and I watched it make him hungry. I gave you nothing, and I watched it make you kind. I have ruled long enough to know which one a kingdom needs. A faint pressure of her fingers on his wrist. I am sorry, my love. I am giving you the hardest thing I own. Forgive me for waiting so long to see you. Queen Serena of Aldermere died an hour before sunrise, with her younger son holding her hand and a single sheet of paper on the table beside her that was going to tear the kingdom in two. Aelian did not sleep. He sat with her until the light came, and then he did the thing his mother had not lived to do. He called the physicians and the chamberlain and let the machinery of grief begin. He said nothing about the paper. He kept it inside his coat, against his chest, and every hour he was aware of it like a second heartbeat. He knew what he was holding. He was holding the end of the only version of himself he had ever been allowed to be, the gentle prince at the edges, the spare. If he burned the paper, no one would ever know, and the world would go on exactly as everyone expected, Cashen crowned, Aelian forgot, the great smooth machine of the realm turning as it always had. It would be so easy. It would be, in a way, a relief. But his mother had used the last strength of her body to write it. She had called him her honest witness. And somewhere under his fear was a small, stubborn voice he had spent 19 years learning to ignore, and it was saying, "She saw you. At the very end, she saw you. Do not throw that away because you are afraid." So when the court assembled 2 days later in the great hall, the lords in their mourning gray, Cashen standing at the front in the place of the heir, already half a king in his bearing. Aelian walked to the center of the room where he had never once stood, and he took the paper from his coat. "My mother left a testament," he said. His voice did not shake, which surprised him. "She amended it the night she died. I was the witness. I am going to read it aloud, and then every one of you may do with it what your conscience demands." The hall went very still. He read it. He read the first part, the settled part, naming Cashen, and he saw his brother's shoulders relax, saw the flicker of impatience. Why is he wasting our time with what we all know? And then Aelian read the second line, his mother's last wish, and he watched it land on the room like a stone dropped into still water. Let the crown pass to the son who was never taught to want it. The silence afterward was the loudest thing Aelian had ever heard. Cashen recovered first. Of course he did. He had been raised to command a room. "That is a forgery." His voice cut across the hall, sharp and curt. "Or worse, the scribbling of a dying woman who did not know her own mind. My mother named me heir 20 years ago before every lord in this room. She did not unmake me from a sickbed with only her spare for a witness." He turned to the lords, arms wide, reasonable, wounded. "You knew her. You knew her strength. Do you believe this is the act of the Queen Serena you served? Or is it the grief of a boy who sat too long in a dark room and dreamed of being more than he is?" It was well done. Aelian had to admit it, even as it cut him. It was exactly the right thing to say, and half the room was already nodding, already relieved to be handed a reason to keep the world the way it was. And this was the moment. Aelian understood it with sudden clarity. This was where the gentle prince at the edges was supposed to fold, to mumble an apology, to let the paper be taken from his hands and quietly lost, to shrink back into the life that was comfortable because nothing was ever expected of him. He did not fold. "You may be right," Aelian said, and his calm made the room turn back toward him. "I cannot prove what was in her mind, neither can you. But I can tell you what she said to me, and I can tell you why she said it, and then you may weigh my word against my brother's certainty." He looked at Cashen, not with anger, but with something steadier. "She said she gave you everything from the day you were born, and it made you hungry. Look at this hall, brother. Our mother is 2 days dead, and you are already counting the lords who will kneel to you. You call that strength. She called it hunger. And she spent her last hour of life trying to spare the kingdom from it." Cashen's certainty cracked just slightly, and in the crack something ugly showed. "You ungrateful, scheming little." "I do not want the crown," Aelian said, and it was the truest thing he had ever said in that hall, and everyone heard the truth in it. "That is the whole of it. That is why she chose me. You are furious because you might lose it. I am afraid because I might have to carry it. Ask yourselves, my lords, which of us should a kingdom follow? The one who cannot bear to lose the throne, or the one who would be relieved to set it down?" It did not settle that day. Such things never do. The court split as courts do, along the lines of their own interests. The older lords, the ones who had loved Serena and feared her equally, remembered 100 small moments. How Cashen had never once asked a servant's name. How Aelian had sat with a dying, stable hand for a full night because the man had no family. The younger, ambitious lords gathered around Cashen, because a hungry king rewards those who feed his hunger, and there is always profit in that. For a while it seemed it might come to blood. Cashen's supporters spoke of the strength of the realm, by which they meant swords. There was a night when armed men moved in the lower town, and Aelian did not sleep, and understood that his mother had not given him a gift at all but a battle, and that she had known it, and had trusted him with it anyway. What turned it in the end was not an army. It was the paper, and the boy who had chosen to read it aloud instead of burning it. Because the lords who were wavering asked themselves a simple question. A man who wanted power would have hidden that second line, or forged a better one, or seized the throne in the confusion of the queen's death. Aelian had done none of these things. He had stood in the center of a room he had spent his life avoiding, and read aloud the very words that made his own life impossibly hard, because a dying woman had asked him to be honest, and he could not make himself be anything else. That, in the end, was the argument his mother had made in ink. Not this son is stronger, but this son will tell you the truth even when it costs him everything, and that is the rarest thing a crown can sit upon. One by one, the gray-haired lords came to Aelian's side, not because they were sure. Because they had watched two brothers stand in a hall, and one had tried to win, and the other had only tried to be honest, and they were old enough to know which of those a kingdom could trust. Cashen left Aldemir before the coronation. He was not exiled. Aelian would not do that to his brother, and said so plainly, which cost him some support among the hard men who wanted the matter settled with certainty. Instead, Cashen was given lands in the south and a title and every honor short of the crown, and he took them with a cold courtesy that was worse than rage, and the brothers did not speak again for a long time. That is the way of these things. Not every wound closes. Some final wishes reshape a kingdom and leave a family broken in the same stroke, and the person who must live inside that contradiction is the one the crown lands on. On the morning Aelian was crowned king of Aldemir, he did not feel triumphant. He felt his mother's paper against his chest, where he still carried it, and he thought about the girl of 23 she must have been when the same weight had landed on her, unready, with no one to sit beside her through the long nights. He was 19. He had been raised to want nothing, and now he wanted only one thing, to be worthy of the impossible faith of a dying woman who had seen him too late and loved him anyway. The gentle prince at the edges walked to the center of the kingdom, and this time he did not leave. And in the years that followed, when Aldemir spoke of King Aelian, the reluctant king, the honest king, the one who ruled for 30 years and never once raised his voice, they always came back to the same beginning. A gray morning, a locked drawer, a single wavering line in a dying queen's hand. Let the crown pass to the son who was never taught to want it. She had been right about everything, and the only sorrow of his long and steady reign was that he could never tell her so.